Thank you very much for having me here today. Just to give you a brief overview of who I am and what I'm doing, essentially, I had an experience 10 years ago, and it was at the time and shortly after the birth of my niece. My niece Jenna is a local. At this time, she's a 12-year-old, lives here in the Davisville community, and she's very important to me. She's near and dear to my heart, and obviously to my entire family. But see, Jenna was born with a very rare disease, a disease called Sturge-Weber Syndrome. And when she was born, the doctors didn't have any clue what she had. The initial thought was, based on her visual signs, was that she had bruising from childbirth. Now, this was my sister's fourth child. This obviously wasn't her first rodeo. And she told the nurse, this isn't bruising from childbirth. You can try to placate, and, obviously the nurses and doctors wanted to ease her anxiety and stress, but my sister knew that it was something more serious. And as we soon learned, it was something vastly more serious. Sturge-Weber is a very rare neurological disorder. It presents with a port wine stain on the face of those affected. So for my niece, literally half of her face was very dark red, almost a purplish color, a very pronounced port wine stain birthmark. And in the eye, on that side of the face, her eye was extremely enlarged. We later learned that she has a very serious case of glaucoma, and unfortunately she's legally blind in that eye. These two things obviously present a very difficult life for my niece, but they're just kind of the tip of the iceberg with Sturge-Weber. The big problem with Sturge-Weber and the most devastating effect is the neurological aspects. So my niece is susceptible to seizures and stroke-like episodes and has suffered some tremendous seizure clusters and some very debilitating, devastating stroke-like episodes in her short 12-year life thus far. It has left her in a mental state that is lacking. She's not on par with her peers academically, socially. She's having a difficult time, and also every day she's dealing with the stress and anxiety, as is my sister and her husband, that Jenna could have at any time a debilitating seizure, another stroke-like episode, or something even far worse. Sturge-Weber is an extremely rare disease. Up until a few years ago, they knew very little about it. And my family, really led by my sister, led the charge, decided we needed to do something to help the medical research community, to help them push this forward. In 2004, when Jenna was born, as I said, they knew next to nothing. So we were very fortunate to be in close proximity to the Kennedy Krieger Institute. And I'm sure everybody in this room, being Marylanders, I'm sure heard that name. Kennedy Krieger Institute's a phenomenal medical facility, and they do a lot of great work. I know one of their big departments is for autism. Sturge-Weber is one of their smaller ones, and it makes sense because it affects such a small percentage of the population. And because it's one of their smaller departments, and because it affects so few children, the funding is extremely limited. And just generally speaking, federal funding for rare neurological, or actually just all rare pediatric diseases, is extremely limited. Doctors and researchers rely heavily on private funding. So we decided we were going to do something, because Sturge-Weber is obviously, it's a very serious disorder. It has some sad and sobering effects to it, and people that suffer with it, like my niece, have at times very difficult lives. We wanted to do something that was positive and upbeat to counter the serious nature of Sturge-Weber. So in 2006 we started, and as I mentioned, the charge was led by my sister, who truly inspired hope in the rest of our family, gave hope to her daughter that there were better days ahead, and gave hope to the community of supporters that helped us. And we started, following her lead, an event called Bands on the Bay. Now, Bands on the Bay, we just about a year ago had our 10th anniversary, and since the inception of Bands on the Bay, my family has raised over $1.2 million for Sturge-Weber research. This money has gone directly to the Kennedy Krieger Institute, and there's one doctor there who, by the grace of God, happens to be one of the leading researchers of Sturge-Weber in the country. Actually, truthfully, she's the leading researcher in the world for Sturge-Weber. And the money we helped raise, and obviously we are one of a community of people raising money and raising awareness for this disorder, but this money helped fund the research that led to the discovery of the cause of Sturge-Weber in 2013. So Dr. Comey is my niece's doctor. Her and her team, and there's another brilliant doctor at Kennedy Krieger named Jonathan Pevsner, and I give you these names because these are two pioneers. These are two doctors who have brought about extreme positive change for this community. They have discovered the gene that causes Sturge-Weber syndrome. Now, I'm no medical expert in any form or fashion. I know what the gene is called. I can tell you a little bit about it. But the point here is that this gene has been researched extensively for years. In fact, this particular gene causes other disorders and diseases that are completely unrelated to Sturge-Weber. So it was really amazing, and it was basically a needle in a haystack kind of discovery that they identified the gene. But also equally as incredible that this gene is heavily researched, and that this gene also has, when mutated during pregnancy, and that's what causes my niece's disease, the gene mutates during pregnancy, it causes other diseases and disorders. So the research money that we helped raise not only led to this discovery, but other people who had been doing similar things to us for other disorders helped further the understanding of this gene. So now it created a new level of hope within the medical community. Here's a family in Davidsonville who is been affected by a terrible thing, yet they took something that was negative and turned it into a positive thing. And my sister has inspired me, and she's inspired other people in the community. And I'm going to talk a little bit about specifically what I have been doing. And obviously, here I am standing in front of a group of like-minded people who do amazing work, and I'm able to share my message with you. So I'd like to believe that we're still taking my niece's, unfortunately, her tragic situation, but we're using it in a positive way. And even today, my niece's, her life is being honored here today because we're sharing this positive story, and I'm hoping that I can share a little something about what we've been doing that you can take and maybe share with your community, or maybe it can help you in some of the work that you're doing. So, kind of fast forward a little bit. As I said, my niece was born in 2004. In 2006, we did our first Bands on the Bay. 10 years later, we've raised $1.2 million, and we have the discovery of the cause of Sturge-Weber syndrome. When the discovery came, I remember my sister sitting on the phone. She's talking to Dr. Comey, and my sister's bawling. And we're very close to family, so I literally was there with her when she gets this call, and we're all, oh my God, what is this news? And we find out it's the best news you could possibly get. So this takes what we've done, and for me, it inspired me even further. It made me understand that we weren't just doing a fundraiser and asking our friends and family for money and putting it in a pot that we never see where it goes or what comes of it. We saw true dramatic change come from this hard work that we put in and from the love that we got from this community. So I decided I wanted to do something more. I wanted to do something to continue to push the envelope in fundraising, and I wanted to do more fun and exciting things to honor my niece's life. And as I said, my niece she's 12 years old, she's vivacious and she's funny, and she's got a spunky little personality. And I said, what can I do to honor her and her determination and her will? So I decided, and I was like, I'm going to come up with something completely outside of the box. So I decided I'm going to buy a bicycle. Didn't own one at the time, did not own a bicycle. I'm going to buy a bicycle and I'm going to ride it across the country. And I'm going to share my niece's story from the West Coast to the Midwest, all the way to the East Coast, telling anybody and everybody who will listen to me about Jenna, about Sturge-Weber, about Dr. Comey and her team, the amazing work that's being done, and how this started from one child who has essentially inspired me. So I hadn't ridden a bike, and here's the funny, I have to admit this, it's kind of the embarrassing part. I hadn't ridden a bike literally since I was, I think, in college. And so we're going back for 20-something years. And I hadn't ridden a bike, didn't own a bike, but I'm riding my bike across the country. All of my friends told me I was crazy. A lot of people laughed at me. And then aside from the physical aspect of the journey, a lot of people said, this isn't a model that works to raise money. It's not a model that's going to raise the kind of awareness you want to raise. But I believed in it. I believed in myself that I could do it. And I believed that the fundraiser, this awareness-creating event, had viability. And I took the hope that I received from my niece, my niece's mom, my sister, and this inspiration, this drive, this purpose that I developed. I truly want to help my niece and these other children. So in 2013, sure enough, I bought a bicycle, and I rode 3,088 miles by myself, self-contained trip, nobody with me, 2 panniers on the back of my bike. There's essentially saddlebags with about 25 pounds of gear, which is way too much. If anybody cycles, way too much. 25 pounds of gear in each saddlebag. Didn't really know what I was doing. Didn't have a clue what I was getting into. But by the grace of God, I crossed 3,088 miles, 14 states, and met these most incredible people along the way. Also met some children at St. Louis Children's Hospital who have Sturge-Weber Syndrome. And I met some other families, one in Delaware, connected another in Pennsylvania, and was fortunate enough to meet a retired NFL football player and his wife. And they were brought into our community because they heard about the work that my family was doing, and their daughter has Sturge-Weber syndrome. So this family heard about it, and like I said, it starts with the birth of my niece, this little 12-year-old vivacious, rambunctious at times, but sweet and funny girl who inspired a movement. And this retired NFL player, if any Pittsburgh Steelers fans are out there, his name is Alan Faneca. He was just recently up for the Hall of Fame. His dynamic career has really done a lot of great work for Sturge-Weber syndrome. Him and his family decided they were going to match dollar for dollar all the money we raised from the event. The following year, I said, I need to do something more. I had the bug. So in 2014, I bought about 10 pairs of running shoes, and I ran from the northeast tip of Maine down to Key Largo, Florida. 1,935 miles. I averaged 23 miles a day, close to a marathon a day, and I did this over 3 consecutive months. Again, met some incredible families along the way. Met some families in Maryland. Ironically enough, there are several other families in Maryland affected by Sturge-Weber. I was blessed to meet 2 families in Florida who have Sturge-Weber, and I also met and stayed with the grandparents of a Sturge-Weber child who heard about what I was doing and hosted me as I came through the area they lived. Alan Faneca, the NFL football player I was just talking about, came out and ran a full day with me, logged 21 miles with me. Former NFL lineman, okay? Former NFL lineman ran 21 miles with me. Again, no support vehicle, no support crew, out there on the road, wearing a hydration pack with a couple of goos in there, if you know what those are, a couple of power bars, whatever I could stick in that thing, and I would run 5 to 6 hours a day. Probably should have had a support vehicle, and I probably should have had people helping me along the way. But I'll tell you this, I had somebody lined up to drive, and this is kind of the funny aspect of the story that's really got a great message behind it. Had a driver, a friend was going to drive my car down the East Coast with me, so that at the end of each day, I would have a ride back to accommodations, and then each morning I could get back to my starting point. Well, my friend canceled on me at the last minute. So I didn't want to cancel the trip. I ended up driving up to Maine by myself in my car, and I said to my family, we're going to get volunteers down the East Coast to help us. It's going to happen. I believe it's going to happen. Because I've experienced, and I experienced this during my bike ride, when you're doing something, and these people weren't, and they weren't necessarily motivated by Al, the man, or even by Sturge-Weber, because a lot of people had never heard about it. They saw that there was a group of people, led, obviously I was the face of this particular endeavor, but they saw a group of people that wanted to create positive change in the world. And that attracted people to what we were doing. And people down the entire East Coast heard about what we're doing in local communities through organizations such as this, came out and either hosted me at their house And anytime anybody wanted to host me at their house, I mean, believe me, I would rather stay in a hotel and have a little privacy and all the kickback and company accommodations. But whenever someone said, we want to host Alan when he comes through our town, I jumped at the chance. Opportunity to tell them about Sturge-Weber, share my niece's story, raise awareness. I could not pass up that opportunity. I met the most incredible people. I remember people would show up literally at the end of my day. I'd be covered in sweat and grime, 22, 23 miles, and there'd be somebody there and say, hey, I'm Joe. Hey, I'm Anna. I'm your driver for today. Hey, I'm Mitch. You're coming home to my house tonight. It was the most incredible experience. There were days where I literally would park my car at the point where I left off the night before, and I'd leave the key on the back tire. I'd run my miles. At the end of the day, my car would be there, and the key would be on the back tire. Didn't necessarily know the people who did it. But really, the true point here is, one little girl started a movement, started something that has changed my life. My niece has inspired me to do this work. And I have since written 2 books about my experience. They're essentially accounts of each experience, daily accounts. With the books, every penny I make from the sale of the books goes directly to Sturge-Weber Syndrome, specifically to Dr. Ann Comey to further research. My goal, my family's goal, is to find a cure for Sturge-Weber Syndrome. And with the hope and the inspiration of my niece, we're doing that. 1 mile and 1 book at a time. Thank you.